Hello, very good to be with you today. I'm going to invite you to turn back with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We began this series last week, and after the opening chapter, we're introduced to the beginning of wisdom by Solomon, the author of the book, of course, guided in all parts by God. And we see, as the king, as a man of experience and wisdom, he's going through and he's testing different parts of life. And in the beginning we see that he was testing life with pleasure. And now today we're going to see he's going to go on to other aspects of it. And today we're going to go through the entirety of this chapter as we see this man going through, and he's literally going through a laundry list of trying things to find the meaning of life and what it's all about. And just again, as it was written those 3,000 years ago, it still speaks to us today, as every single thing that he's talking about are all things that we can easily identify from and we can get wisdom from. So, we began last week with this idea of the test, the searching after pleasure, and we looked at its different meanings, and he wanted to catalog it. He wanted to try it. He wanted to enjoy himself as an experiment, like a scientist. He said, I'm going to just try everything. And people still try it today. And I'm sure all of us to some capacity do try it. We're not immune from seeking after pleasure. It's natural, just as a human being. These are things that we seek after. But as he went through it, he realized, he comes back kind of to the refrain of this entire book of Ecclesiastes, that was also vanity. Again, not necessarily in itself sinful, though some things were, but more empty, not lasting, kind of like a vapor. He said of laughter, it's mad, of pleasure, well, what use is it? And there's a point, in life, we all want to have some downtime. We all want to seek pleasurable things. Last week, I went through a catalog of statistics in the United States and the money and time that people spend on things. But in the end, it's maybe temporarily amusing. It temporarily lets us forget about our problems. But in the end, it is a vapor, and it's passing. For example, as so many do today, he searched with his heart how to cheer his body with wine. My heart's still guiding me with wisdom and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. And he goes on, and he lived the life to the absolute fullest. And some things were noble, I guess we would say. He made great works, houses and vineyards, and we do spend time and effort and money in our houses and our yards, but he built great works and gardens and parks and trees, which can be very enjoyable. Right now, it's the season of fall. It's one of my favorite seasons, and I love to see the trees. He made pools and water and forest of trees, and he had all kinds of possessions, and he even had more. We think about some of our high-profile people today, but he was living large, if you will. And he had silver and gold, and just simply put, he indulged in every way possible. I think a lot of people would say, wow, that's the life I would like to obtain. If anybody lived it all, if anybody had it all, if anybody tried it all, it was Solomon. And he was great. He wasn't just great in those possessions, he had good standing. People sought after him. And he said he kept his heart from no pleasure, literally. But in the end, it was striving after the wind, as he said before. There was nothing to be gained. Now, just before we move on, seeking some of the pleasures of life, indulging in some good food, having a nice house, going on a vacation. These are not wrong things. These are not sinful things, and that's not what this book is telling us. But they are still temporary pursuits. They are things that will pass. They have a place, they have a time, they can be enjoyed. Of course, some things are wrong and sinful and seeking pleasure. But most of the things that he's talking about are not something that's considered wrong, but they left him feeling empty. So, what's next? He tried the experiment with pleasure and it didn't work. So let's go on. Let's try. He was a very smart man. Let's go through another catalog of experiences because pleasure did not fill the needs that he had. So next, he said, from pleasure, I'm going to consider wisdom and madness and folly. What can the man do? Comes after the king, only what has already been done. That kind of harkens back to something in the first chapter. There's nothing new under the sun. What can be done? That which has already been done. Now, in terms of considering these three together as a group, wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment, being wise. Madness is extremely foolish, irrational, or reckless behavior, and folly is just the lack of good sense. So these things are the opposite of wisdom. And he does come to a correct conclusion here. He saw there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there's more gain in light than in darkness. Now this could, I'm not going to take the time to do it, be its own study, if you will. You can look up the verses in the scriptures on light and darkness. But they are exact opposites. Think about it. If you have light, what could be more opposite from darkness than light? Well, what could be more opposite of folly, madness, than having wisdom? So he's cataloging this two, and he's realizing they are exact opposites. But here we get into a discourse, and there's something that kind of reminds me back when we did the study of Job. There are some parts that he's saying that are absolutely true, like the wisdom that was trying to be given by Job's friends. They said a lot of truthful things. But they also said some things that were not. They had some incorrect conclusions as well. And that's what we're going to see here. So what we have, just like that discourse in Job, we have a discussion here that is Solomon's thinking. And he was not perfect. Yes, was he wise? Was he smart? Absolutely. But he was far from perfect. And we also see that he's kind of in this tug-of-war wrestling match with his soul as he's going through this. So don't think Scripture is describing this process that he's going through. And so we need to keep that in context as we're studying it. So he says, the wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I perceive the same event happens to all of them. So I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For of the wisdom is of the fool there's no enduring remembrance, seeing that the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. Let me just pause here for a second. There's a lot of truth in what he's saying. In terms of death, it comes upon all of us. And there's a passage in Revelation that says, I saw the great, and I saw the low, and I saw the rich, and I saw the poor, and I saw every person. And we all are the same. That is true. We all die. No matter what we do in this life, there is the first death, the initial death, and that's true. But there's also an incorrect conclusion being drawn. In this state that he's in, when he comes to this realization, like, I'm not going to live forever. Whatever I possess is going to be gone. Many people will hate life and then become grievous because you say, it's hopeless. I feel discouraged. Whatever I do, it's going to vanish. It's going to be gone. Now, this is a state that he's in. When any of us, when we come to that initial conclusion, it can be kind of scary. to think about everything passing away. So he's describing the state that he's in. It's not the very end. But he's going to keep going to the next part. Okay, so there was pleasure. And then there was wisdom and madness and folly. And now toil or work. What about work itself? The nobility of work. We've got to again consider context in all this. I hated all my toil, in which I toil under the sun, seeing I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he'll be a wise or a fool. And frankly, he ended up leaving his kingdom to some very foolish people. So that was true. Just like many rich people today. People that have built wealth, they can leave it to somebody and it be squandered away in a moment. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. He sees it fleeting away like a vapor. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair. Another incorrect conclusion. He said, well, work's not going to do it. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving apart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This is vanity. Well, it is true that people can have a lot of possessions and work hard and be successful in this world, but they don't have peace and they don't rest at night. And it is a vexation. And so we see him in a state of being troubled. He's going through this wrestling match of his soul. But he does come here at the end to a very important assessment. He said there's nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. But here's the more important part. This also has solace from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he's given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after wind. He's still in a place of vexation here, as he's describing this process. But he does begin to see the beginning of wisdom in all this. Apart from the hand of God, we do have nothing. And as we bring this chapter to conclusion, I want to reflect upon some things. It's a long chapter. I've gone through it relatively quickly these last 2 weeks. In the first week, we talked about all the pleasure. We live in a country, we live in a world today where this is kind of the focus of life. But in the end, many of those pursuits, many of the amusements are not simple and wrong, but they are vanity in that they will not lead to ultimately what satisfies the soul and that which is eternal. And yes, temporarily, wisdom and madness and folly, wisdom, like light, is better than madness, folly, and darkness. But in the end, even wisdom itself, you can never be wise enough, if you will, to save yourself, nor can you work hard enough. And so, the challenge that Solomon's going through here is pleasure's not the end all, even wisdom's not the end all, working hard, building up works is not the end all. He's going through a crisis of soul as he realizes what everything is going to be gone. I may leave it to another person. It may go like the wind and disappear like the dust. And so his soul is going through some discouragement. And it leads to some incorrect conclusions. I hope a temporary state for any of us, but we get discouraged. We might even kind of temporarily hate life. That should not be the end of it. We're vexed, we're confused, we have despair. But let this not be the end. If we have an incorrect conclusion, we let us feel like life's hopeless. That's not the point at all. But a key realization that we can take away from all this is that no pleasure, no wisdom, no toil, no anything satisfies us. Everything begins with God. Everything comes from God. Any work that you've done, any pleasure that you have, any wisdom that you receive, the joy, the peace, it all comes from God. There's nothing eternal that will last without God. So I don't want you to be a Solomon hating life. I don't want you to be vexed or in despair, but also don't want you trusting in pleasure, or trusting in wisdom, or trusting in the work of your hands. That through the examination of all these things and learning from the experience of this man and drawing upon our own experience, let it come down to this simple thought as we take these two chapters combined. Begin with the wisdom and the realization that everything in life is purpose. The things which are not vanity, the things which are not temporary, that all things come to us from God, that He is good. And I hope you can find not vexation and not vanity, but encouragement in that.